Hey, good afternoon. The Committee on Education is convening. It's the 15th of August, and we are at about 3:13 p.m. in conference room 309 at the state capitol. Today is a very important topic. It's the issue of the bus routes cancellations as it relates to the Department of Education. We know that over the past couple of years that this challenge has come to a head, and we know that last year 78 routes were canceled right before school. And this year, with a couple of days' notice, virtually no notice for some, 147 routes were also canceled. This is a problem. It impacted multiple islands and thousands of students. And so we're here to learn from the department to see how we can get to a better place. Many House members were contacted by their community members, and I'm sure you were contacted a lot. So people have questions, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. With that, we'll go ahead and let you get started.
Thank you, Chair Woodson, Vice Chair Lachico, members of the committee, Keith Hayashi, Superintendent. I want to thank you all very much for providing us the opportunity to come and share with the House Education Committee the challenges that we're facing with bus transportation. We are very keenly aware of the challenges and the situation that has put our students and our families in. And I want to assure you that we are definitely committed to doing all we can to rectify this situation and working together with our bus contractors. We're very fortunate to have Deputy Superintendent Randy Moore working with us on this. Deputy Moore has been very instrumental in working together with our contractors as well as our transportation section within the department. We do have daily meetings at 7 a.m. So that we are all together and getting the right information, collecting the most current information as we move forward. But Deputy Moore has been a point on this. So at this point, I will turn it over to Deputy Moore to share with the committee and our slide deck in terms of where we are now and what the situation is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, committee, for the opportunity to be in front of you. I hope it will clear the air for not only you, but for parents, general public, so I appreciate the opportunity. First slide shows, do this. Thanks. This is background information that you all know. Federal law requires us to provide transportation home to school, curb to school, we call it curb to curb, for special educated students for whom this service is provided in their IEP. It's not all special ed students, but if the IEP says department needs to take you from your home to your school, that's a federal requirement. The regular bus service is not required by federal or state law, but we have developed rules that provide for the regular ed transportation. If you look at the next slide, who qualifies for student transportation? Half the students, the yellow half, meet our guidelines for eligibility for student transportation. The red ones are the in-walk zone, means they live within a mile if they're elementary school students, a mile and a half if they're secondary students. If they live within those distances, we don't provide transportation for them. So it's outside those distances, and that's the red 37%. The blue 12 are students who go to school outside their own geographic area, and we do not provide transportation for them. The next slide shows the student ridership breakdown for last school year. You can see that the big yellow piece, 82% don't use the school bus. 16%, the blue piece, are our regular ed student riders that use the big yellow school bus, and the skinny little 2% red sliver are the special education students that have student transportation as provided in their IEP. If you look at the data on the right-hand side of that slide, a couple things I'd like to point out that aren't there. The special ed student number last year was 3,129. Later on, you'll see how many buses we provide as a result of that. But On average, there are 15 students per special ed bus. The bus doesn't hold 15, but the buses typically will make more than one run. So 15 students per special ed bus. That 3,129 last year has increased by 13% to 3,545 at the beginning of this year. And at 15 students per bus on average means we need 15 more buses just for the increase in the special ed students. And that 13% increase in 1 year is a 28% increase over the last 3 years. So that special ed transportation requirement increases. The more special ed students we need, the more special ed drivers we need, and the fewer drivers, if there's one single pool, fewer drivers that are available for the regular bus. That's a fairly significant number. Looking at the next slide, you'll see our budget. On the left-hand side, you appropriate $85 million for us. We collect $2 million in fares, total 87.6, call it 88. Our expenses, 85 million for the buses, bus contract payments, roughly half-half special ed and regular ed. In addition, we pay parents mileage if they are eligible for transportation and we don't or can't provide it. We reimburse them for that. We also provide city bus passes for students who are eligible for free transportation in urban Honolulu, but we don't provide urban Honolulu regular ed transportation, so we give them a free bus pass. That's another $2 million, and then $3 million to run the enterprise. Our projected budget for the year is negative $3 million, and the department will have to run around and beg the superintendent for additional funds to cover that if it, in fact, materializes. If you look at the little box down on the left, the cost per student rider, you see the regular ed student rider is $1,632 per year. If you use 180 school days per year, that works out to about $9 a day per student. We collect from those who pay $1.60. Those who are eligible for free ride, of course, we don't collect anything. And the special ed students who don't pay anything, $13,500 per student, and dividing by 180 days is $75 a day. So that's very expensive transportation. There was a question, and some of you were kind enough to give us questions that we could address. One of the questions was, well, what will we do with the expected savings if we don't pay the transportation company to do this? To the extent that their buses are covered by other bus companies or by the tour bus companies, money comes out to pay them, and money comes out to pay the parents if we have to reimburse them for mileage, and money comes out if we pay a student who would normally get school bus service, for example, in Mililani, but we don't provide the service, so we give them a bus pass. If they are eligible for we give them a bus pass, so we pay for those. Next page, next slide. This year, beginning July 1, or earlier than July 1, beginning July 1, we have new contracts everywhere, statewide. The result of that is that there were contractor adjustments. So contractor A used to serve these students, but they were awarded these routes instead, different place, different contractors. So there were a lot of contractor shuffling. Under ordinary circumstances, the first week or two of school, particularly for the special ed students, is a little rocky because special ed is home address to school. And if students are moving, the bus driver got to go to the new house. If the student changes schools, they go from elementary to middle or middle to high. It's a different bus. So there's always a period of time to shake that out. And in addition, when the contractor changes, it's not only the driver that has it, but you have a new driver, but you've got a new dispatcher and a new everything. Usually within 2 weeks, that should settle down. So by the end of this week, those problems that you may have heard about that come in the first 2 weeks should be pretty well behind us. The next slide shows a number of buses under the current contracts. You'll see down at the bottom, the regular ed buses 373 and the special ed buses 294. This is on the basis in the request for proposals that we put out, sort of a one bus per route. We have, I don't think since the beginning of time, ever had enough buses, so there are a number of routes that are serviced by a bus twice. So he does one, he comes back, he does the other. So the 373 is really a route count. The next slide, and don't go yet, but the next slide where that 373 number is will show 275 as the number of currently available, or as of a couple of weeks ago available drivers. There was a question raised, well, can we reduce the demand for buses and therefore by drivers by adjusting the routes? We have, the routes are determined with an outside computer service. Most of the regular ed routes don't change from year to year, so the students know where the buses are, but where the stops are, but we take the opportunity to look and say, can routes be combined without changing the bus stops? Can we tinker with that? And of course, if there are new areas, some new Gentry or Ho'opili or what have you, subdivision opens up, we of course have to change that. But for the most part, the regular ed routes stay the same. But the software looks at them to say, is there an opportunity to optimize that? So again, on the next slide, this shows historically the driver trend, which is headed south for a long time. This is a national phenomenon as well as a local phenomenon. And there are a variety of reasons why the job is not wildly attractive. It's a split shift. You work in the morning, you go home, you work in the afternoon. If you have a commercial driver's license with a P, passenger endorsement, you have a license to drive a tour bus. To drive a school bus, you need, on top of the P, you need an S. If you've got a P endorsement, you can drive a tour bus. So if you've got the time and so forth, would you rather drive a tour bus with 50 adults or a school bus with 50 children? Some school bus drivers think it's the best job in the world, but that's not true for every bus driver. Students typically don't tip the driver on the way out the door, and so you can see there is a difference in the job. And later on in the presentation, I'll address what kinds of things might be done to look at that. But you can see the trend is disquieting long term. Next slide is the current situation, where the contractors are short of drivers, as you can see. And the big question, that is a totally appropriate question, that many, many people asked is, so why did you wait so long before you let us know you had a problem? The bus contractors are obliged to give us regular reports on, so what's your driver roster look like? So we have been following the driver rosters with the bus companies, showing they don't have enough drivers. But bus company operators are optimistic that we think we'll have it covered by the start of school. If we knew 2 weeks ago what we know now, if we knew, we would have probably, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before school started, sat down with the contractor and said, you think you're going to do it, but it doesn't look like it. So let's, as a contingency, say, assume you don't get any more drivers at all, and we're frozen at this inadequate level. What do we do? Which routes will we discontinue? And then let everybody know that, okay, routes A, B, C, D, E were POHO. If, contractor, you're able to get the drivers, we can go back and say, tell everybody this 3 weeks before school starts. Well, 2 weeks before school starts, actually the drivers are there, so we're going to restore A and B. And if 1 week before, we'll restore C and D. But at least we have given the heads up. As I say, with hindsight, It's a wonderful thing. It's a great lesson. With hindsight, we could have done it differently. In fairness to the bus contractors, they kept us appraised of their driver situation, but also said, we think we're going to make it. Together, if we had done it differently, if we had thought about it, we would have done it differently. So we did reduce the number of routes, as it says here. The factors we considered in deciding which routes to cut. First of all, special ed students must be served. Because there were not enough special ed drivers, and they were an absolute necessity, the contractor was obliged to take some drivers with a full license to drive the big bus. The special ed drivers don't need the same licenses. The big bus drivers, got to put them in the special ed bus, but then we don't have them for the big bus. So it's a compounding problem. So first priority, special ed must be served. Secondly, availability of public transit. And public transit, availability, well, so how far do you need to live from the bus stop before we consider it's available, is a judgment call. We looked at school level. We would save elementary routes before we saved middle school routes and high school routes. We looked at the population demographics. Is this bus route serve a stressed community? We'll keep that bus service before we keep a community that has less stress. So those are the factors. Alternatives offered. On Oahu, if you had already applied for a bus route and we couldn't provide it, we gave you a free Holo card. On the neighbor islands, and we didn't have a problem on Kauai, but on Maui and the Big Island, the buses are free for students. Big Island, they're free for everybody. Maui County, they're free for students. So we said, here's an opportunity. So that was part of the question of, is public transportation available? We offer mileage reimbursement if you're entitled to bus service by our rules and we don't do it. We'll reimburse the parent. The current federal rate is 67 cents a mile. And we also offer distance learning. If there's simply no way you can get to school, we have the COVID-19 protocols of distance education. Next slide. There were questions as to, so the governor's emergency proclamation really do anything for you? And the answer is absolutely. It allowed us to contract directly with Roberts to provide buses. If a geographic area was awarded to ground transport, and I'm making numbers up, they couldn't do 20 routes on that contract. Roberts could step in with 10. We could contract directly with Roberts for that 10, and we actually have a contract with Roberts on a week-by-week basis, so that if ground transport hires its drivers, we scale back Roberts. But we could not have done that without an emergency proclamation. We would have had to go through the procurement, and by the time we got to the end, the problem would have taken care of itself. We allowed ground transport, or the emergency proclamation allowed ground transport to subcontract with tour bus companies. Normally, you can't have a tour bus operator with just a passenger endorsement drive kids to and from school. Now, so ground is subcontracting with Polynesian Adventure. They are talking with others. The caveat to the subcontract with the tour bus operator is federal regulations say you can't take your kid to school on a bus unless it's a yellow school bus. So if you're taking them on a tour bus, they can't go on the campus. They got to stop on the street and let them off. So that, and we're used to that. We had that with the Lahaina arrangement last year. It also, the emergency proclamation allowed the bus contractors to utilize bus drivers in a yellow bus without the S endorsement. So they can put a tour bus driver in a school bus as long as this proclamation lasts, which is October 1. It enabled us to ask the National Guard, can you kokua with drivers? We set them something and they said, we'll see. It lets the school use During the pandemic, a number of schools took their pandemic money to buy small school buses. The little ones don't need a CDL license to drive it. So the schools can use those to take students. It's kind of a finger in the dike because there are only 14 passengers instead of 56 for high school, and 2 elementary students get on a big yellow bus. But it's something. And Maui Economic Opportunity, a county entity that operates buses, said, well, maybe we can help. So we're pursuing that as well. So the items there listed on that are what we can do with the governor's proclamation that we wouldn't be able to do without it. Then the external communication. There was a question about communication, which is really it's really a question about how come so late. It was, and I've talked to you about why so late. But in terms of communication, once we made the decision we got to do this, the communication was fairly rapid. People look at it as a communication problem, but it was a decision problem. This gives you and I'm not the communications expert, these are the internal ways that we run our communication shop. If you have any questions, I'll call Nanea. Next one, how to minimize the recurrence. And this is probably the most critical because one way or another we're going to get through this, but if you can look at the long-term driver demographics, we're not in good shape. First thing we're going to do when the dust is settled is undertake an after-action review, which you're probably familiar with in emergency things. It looks at, so what actually happened? Why did it happen? What were the consequences? And most importantly, what do we do better next time? That will identify, hopefully, a path forward so that as the driver attrition continues, this won't happen again. One of the things that we've kicked around is to create, and this is a for instance, let's say a 3/4 time DOE employee who would then have the opportunity to moonlight for Roberts or ground transport, drive the bus to school in the morning, park the bus on the campus, drive it home in the afternoon. School would need to say, yeah, we can create a 3/4 time custodian, even cafeteria worker, need not be the same person that drives the bus in the morning, that drives it back in the afternoon. That would be really up to the bus company. These would be employees of the bus contractor while they're driving the bus, but they'd be our employees during the day. But what it does is it fills that puka in what is otherwise a split shift. You've got a split shift, but you've got your other employer in the middle. So from the employee standpoint, you've got a full-time job or better. I kicked around yesterday with some of the complex superintendents. Say, yeah, we're ready. So if the school is willing, then the employee has to be willing, and that employee's got to go get a commercial driver's license with a P and S endorsement to drive those big buses. It should save us some money because part of the cost that the contractor bakes into their price with us is the bus starts in the morning, driver goes to the base yard, takes the bus to the first bus stop, drives it to school, might have another run, but then drives the bus back to the base yard. Then in the afternoon, picks it up at the base yard, drives it back to the school for the first run home, and so forth. So the bus company will save deadhead cost, and we will sit down and negotiate. So what's in it for the DOE if we're able to do this for you? Some schools are ready, willing, and able. The big one, and big in several senses, is staggered school start times. And as a for instance, that looks like, just an example, elementary school starts at 7:30, middle school starts at 8:15, high school starts at 9. What that does for the bus is probably cut the driver demand. If you implemented it statewide, cut the need for drivers by half. Huge thing. So I said this is a big deal. It's big because of that, but it's really big because of the impact on students, teachers, families. And it's not just the school staff. We've got 100,000 families sending children to school. There are a number of jurisdictions on the mainland that do this, have been doing it for a long time, so we know that it works. There are schools here who are willing to give it a try, and maybe we'll start with a pilot if there can be all of the schools in a complex area, because one school can't do it all by itself. So I would like to think that, Superintendent, we can run that up the flagpole and hope that people salute. We also will work with the counties, and I haven't talked to the Kauai County, but the other 3 counties are all willing to sit down and talk and say, okay, how can we help? Not only in this near-term problem, but longer term. Some of you, I was going to say some of you are old enough to remember, but I don't see enough gray hair. When I was a kid, the city bus ran from Kalihi to Waialae. That was it. If you lived in Waiawa or Kailua or Waianae, there was a separate bus company, Suburban Transit or this or that, or the old sampans. So Honolulu was just Honolulu. And DOE did not provide any urban Honolulu school bus service because the city was there. When Frank Fossey bought the bus system and spread it island-wide, apparently nobody thought to sit down and say, okay, Mayor, can we have your buses serve our schools as well? There's something in the federal subsidy that the bus companies get to say that they cannot do. This is because of, I understand, nationally lobbying by the bus contractors. Municipal companies cannot carry explicit student routes. You can't have a school route that ends at the school just because of that. Although there are a few here on Oahu. But increased service, a greater breadth of a network of routes may be part of the solution on the county basis. We'll look at that. A couple things that I did not put down there, but I'll mention now. There's a carpool app that parents can sign up for, so you can arrange your own carpools, and you're arranging carpools only with people that you know. So it's not random person that you're entrusting your child to. We're gonna look at that. And then there's another one that looks sort of like a quasi-Uber thing, where a company will organize private car and van drivers who are pre-checked, presumably employee background check type thing, pre-checked to be safe, that will pick up 4, 5, 6 students and take them to school. So we're going to look at both of those, see if anything comes of them. And then finally, just acknowledgments. This has been a challenge. Everybody has been willing to pitch in, and I can understand unhappiness. I think I would be unhappy if it happened to me. The governor's emergency proclamation was a big help. You folks have asked good questions and given some good advice. I appreciate that. All of the knowledge certainly doesn't reside between these ears, and it doesn't reside in the department. And the more people that can put their oar in the water and help, the better the long-term solution we're going to have. So I appreciate your ongoing engagement there. Thanks to Roberts and Polynesian Ventures for helping us fill some of the pukas. The county mayors have been great, and their transportation officials and others are going to do this, and we're thankful to them. And with that, Ken, I'm ready for questions.
Thank you. Members' questions. Rep. Garcia.
Thank you. I have a few questions. The first one is, what is the total number of school bus routes currently statewide, and how many are filled and how many are temporarily suspended?
Short answer is I don't, Megan. Total. Routes and buses are different things.
Routes.
Your routes. High 3 figures.
What's that?
High 3 figures.
High 3 figures, okay. Do we know how many are temporarily suspended currently?
not currently filled by one of these fingers in the dike solutions. Will come. You got another one?
Yes. Could you briefly explain the reimbursement process for mileage for parents? I
Yeah.
saw that in your slide earlier.
Yeah. There's a form which we usually use because there are students who live in areas that we can't serve permanently, never served. So it's for them, but we also use the same form for this interim stuff. So parent fills out a name, address, here's where I live. Then it goes to the school that says, here's the distance, and confirms that the kid was in school that day, forwards it, and we pay it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, members. Any other questions?
No, I haven't forgotten about your question, so don't let us go without it.
I haven't either.
Go ahead.
I believe that the services had been resumed to several schools statewide. And my question is, why is my school not included in having a service resumed? James Campbell High School. Because I know services had been decreased also in that school. And I've looked at the list of those schools that have services resumed, and James Campbell High School is not included. And you know, James Campbell High School is the largest, is the most populated high school in the entire state of Hawaii, and we have a lot of students needed bus service. So what was your criteria in resuming the services to the other school, and you did not provide that service back to our school?
Okay, if you have the PowerPoint in front of you, or run away, on page 9 of that, the factors that we considered were for special ed students. But for the regular bus, the availability of public transit. So for example, just to use Ocean View Estates in Ka'u, which is really out in the boonies. Rep. Capella knows that. So that we would consider more difficult for students to get to school on public transportation than Campbell. So we looked at the availability of public transportation, the school level, so we'd, all other things equal, if we got one bus, we'd put it in the elementary school before we put it in the high school. And then finally, the population demographics. Again, Ocean View is kind of the poster boy, where it's a low-income, parents may not have ability to get their own kid to school. So those were the three
Criteria. Okay.
three criteria that would affect Campbell.
So in the future, is there any possibility that you will be resuming those bus services to our school?
I will be very disappointed if we're not able to.
Yeah, please do.
I can't guarantee anything other than tomorrow's sunrise.
Okay, so we're looking forward into that.
I don't have a timetable.
Oh, okay.
It's how I should have mentioned but didn't. The contractors are regularly recruiting. You can see that the total number of drivers keeps falling, but there's a lot of turnover with that number. So they're hiring and they're retiring. They've got health problems. They go to Las Vegas, what have you. So there is, I think Robert said they hire 80 bus drivers a year. Just turnover bus drivers a year. So they're always hiring, and today they have drivers in the pipeline. The pipeline starts with, I want to drive a school bus. You have a commercial driver's license? If you don't, you got to go to commercial driver's license school. If you got a commercial driver's license, you have a P endorsement to drive passengers. The P endorsement, I understand, is just a written test. But the S endorsement to drive student passengers is one more step. Then you've got all those three. Then we require fingerprint employee background check. We can't have people with bad histories in our school bus. And there are, unfortunately, folks who get through the license pipeline, background check, they don't pass. So that's the problem. And both companies have drivers in that pipeline, various stages. And that was the reason for their optimism before school started, that, oh yeah, we're gonna get them because we got all these people in the pipeline.
Go ahead.
Well, first off, thank you so much for your briefing and for being here. Just to follow up on that question and the mileage reimbursement, but that one first. How long does that pipeline take? Can you walk us through that process period? And then on top of, because I've had constituents say, I want to drive the school bus, but it's difficult because there's only one place that does the fingerprinting on island. It's 4 hours away from where I live. Taking the city bus to get there is impossible, and then you have to schedule with the department, and it seems like there's so many barriers. So if we need school bus drivers, how can we make it easier for people who want to become that? And then also I've been told by constituents that it takes it's like an upfront cost for them. Sometimes they don't have that upfront cost. So can you walk us through how quickly someone can become a CDL driver with that S classification to drive our school buses, and then also layering on top of that the background check and the fingerprinting and all the things that are necessary for schools?
Very good. If you're starting with nothing but your regular old Hawaii driver's license, no commercial license, you have to go to school. If you sign up with ground transport, they will pay for that cost. I believe if you sign up for Roberts, I think they have an in-house school. So the going to school part, out-of-pocket part, is currently taken care of because bus companies really need these folks. I believe if all you start out with is your Hawaii driver's license to get to the end, 6 to 8 weeks. I'm going to turn to Megan. 6 to 8 weeks to get from no driver's license at all to passing the background check. Go to CDL school, take your P, take your S, take your background check.
If you're going to be answering
please
questions,
come up.
please come up and use the
I'm
microphone.
sorry. She was going to.
You can just identify yourself, administrator, so people know your role.
Hello, good afternoon. It depends on the individual because there is a training aspect for the CDL licensing, especially with the S endorsement. If you get your S endorsement, it also covers the P endorsement because technically the testing and the requirement is higher than the P. So most oftentimes now, if you're gonna get your endorsements, they'll just have you get the S endorsement because it covers the P. So in that regard, there is also, you need to have drive time behind the wheel. And so there's a driving component and a test taking component. So depending on, where you're at with that, it can take between 6 to 8 weeks. It can take longer. But if you don't pass, I know that there is a waiting period to retake your test again. I'm just not certain on how long that is.
And it's not as if I want to start school tomorrow. Once it starts, that's the process. The background check is ours. So the fingerprint is ours. We really started expediting that process. I think the Hilo office pushed out 50.
And it's only the Hilo office that has that.
No, Hilo for the Big Island, Maui for Maui, Oahu for Oahu.
So on the Big Island is really big.
Yes, it is.
So Hilo's kind of far for people who live
That's true.
in Kona.
Well, you need a fingerprint machine is the problem. I don't know if there's a fingerprint machine in Honolulu. That's
Okay. Thank you. It would be great if there could be multiple on both the west side of the island and the east side of the island.
so like we've got traveling notaries, maybe we have a traveling fingerprint.
I hope so. Chair, can I ask another question?
Please go ahead.
In regards to the mileage reimbursement, I've had parents say that they can claim it only one direction. So if you're taking your kid to school, and if you live in Ocean View, driving to Pahala Elementary or driving to Konawaina, that's 30 miles, right? But they can only claim one way. And then their drive back, they cannot claim that reimbursement for themselves. And then they're also driving back to the school, which they cannot also claim. They can only claim once they've picked up their child and then are returning home.
That's true, that's true. The reason for that is that we don't have any way to efficiently verify that I'm taking my kid from Ocean View to Pahala, and then I'm going on to Hilo to work. And then I'm coming back to Pahala and pick up my kid. So while there is a morning and an afternoon, there's something in the middle that's to their own personal stuff, or I take my kid and I go shopping. I understand. I understand completely.
Yeah. I hope that there's a way that we can fix that, because for a lot of parents, they are just driving home.
Yes, I appreciate that there are.
And then also making it easier, because it seems like it's a very difficult process for parents to be able to just turn in that paperwork and get the verification from the school in order to even receive that reimbursement.
I looked at the form this morning, and if I were the emperor, I would design it differently. So we'll be visiting that subject. The form gets turned into the school, because the school has to verify that, yeah, the kid was in school this day that you're claiming that you drove him.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of steps.
Yeah, unfortunately it is.
I have more questions, but I can wait, Chair.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I think a big question for me is there's still a chunk of time where parents they didn't have any school buses, right? There were none running, specifically in my district.
Yes.
Where's the money that was used for that portion of, for the bus contract? So if the route was suspended or canceled or consolidated, there has to be a savings because we weren't running any school buses during that period. How is that either being relocated, or did the contractor who couldn't fulfill their duty as a contractor, are they keeping that money?
Oh, no, they get paid after the fact
Okay.
for buses, per bus per day. So if they don't run the bus, they don't get paid. So where does the money that we
Yes.
save get? And if we have no offsetting expense, like the case you mentioned, well, if there's mileage reimbursement, that would be an offsetting expense. So if the kid stays home, nothing happens, then it goes to reduce the deficit.
Okay. And then my very last question, parents of children who are special education, they are saying that they are within new contracts that these students are now that these buses are no longer going down their roads, which they have gone down for numerous years now, say 8 years if this child has been in the public school system for that long. All of a sudden it changed. And the bus contractors are saying, well, you have to go look at your IEP, or you need to go talk to your teacher, who normally they would talk to, their scheduled time is in March or April. So that doesn't help them in this moment. Help me understand how that's possible, how a contractor can change something like that for a student, especially when our special education students are the top priority.
Well, if it's home to school, it's in their IEP, I don't understand that either. So that's supposed to be resolved. I can't resolve it without knowing the student, and I don't want you to tell me who the student is in a public setting.
Okay, we can
But
follow up, but I think that there are a lot of
yeah.
little stories like that from community members that are really starting to compound. And that's where I think the fears for myself and I think other legislators, and especially from my community, that's where that fear is community from.
I appreciate particularly your community.
Thank you, Chair.
As I said at the beginning, the first couple of weeks, special ed is rocky because of the changes. It ought to settle down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Members, any other questions? Go ahead.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's okay. You can go ahead and answer Rep.
I was
Garcia's
going
questions.
Megan, do you have the, oh, you have it. Oh, okay. You want to answer it? Oh, great.
Thank you. I have a response, Representative Garcia. So we have a total of 285 routes statewide. 385, I'm sorry, 385. A total number of routes that were suspended was 147.
Got it. Okay.
And the routes that have been reinstated is 34.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, but that's okay.
Thank
Okay.
you so much for your presentation. You answered many of the questions that I submitted beforehand in the presentation, so I really appreciate that. One question that lingers is the enforceability of the contract. So I'm wondering if this failure to fulfill the requirements of the contract provides an opening to revisit the terms of the contracts, especially for ground transportation. Have you been discussing that?
Right now, our priority is to get the kids to school, and I don't want to get into a butt heads with a contractor over something that's going to divert that effort. When the dust settles, we will have a discussion on that. There's a provision for liquidated damages. The contractor doesn't get paid for the bus they don't provide. They're paying the bank for the bus they don't provide. So they're highly motivated to run those buses.
Yeah, but the contracts are really lucrative, and these are 7-year contracts.
Yes.
Right, so this would be an opportune window, in my view. So that's my thought.
No, the valid point.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions?
I have one more.
Okay, Rep. Garcia first.
Okay,
and then Rep. Capella.
I have one regarding the holo card. So for the families who were dependent on school bus routes, they've been suspended, they've been given the option to get a free holo card from their schools for transportation. I had more than 5 parents reach out to my office saying that they've had trouble getting the holo cards. They sent in their application process, and it's been weeks, sometimes even months, and they've had to pay personal funds, about $15 a week, to send their kids to school on the public bus system. And so can they get reimbursed for that $15 expense, which they're currently paying per week? And what can we do to make sure that once they apply for those holo cards, they get them in a timely fashion to be used? That's first thing on holo card. Second thing is, one parent said that their kid lost their holo card. In order to get a new holo card, since they're a student, they would have to go from Kapolei to Kalihi to the main station to get their picture taken and show their school ID that they are a student for it to be replaced. Many parents work 2-3 jobs. They can't go during normal business hours to Kalihi to do this. And there was no option for them to go to the Kapolei Hale or any other satellite city hall nearby to do so. So that's an issue that was brought up, and was hoping to see if we could work on a viable solution. Thank you.
That's something that we need to discuss with the city, because their holo cards are not
Right.
ours. Yeah, but I've noted it. Your first question, though, I'm puzzled how school's only been here for 2 weeks, so how could parents have?
I guess this was last
Oh,
school
okay,
year.
okay.
Yeah. It's been ongoing.
Okay, if there are any, I don't know what I can do about last year. If there are any this year, and I'm not saying I can't do anything about last year, but I offhand can't think about it. But if there are any this year that are having that problem, and they've applied to ride the bus, we said yes, and then we didn't provide the bus. I hear the problem. Offhand, I don't know why that would happen, or we ought to be able to do something about it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rep. Capella.
Thank you, Chair. Kind of going back to the contract.
Yeah.
So I wanted to follow up as well on, I think these contractors, so they benefit the contractor, sometimes to the detriment of our students. And I think an example of this is the $8 million that we lost because the contract, in federal money, to help electrify school buses. So I think that this is a larger part of a larger conversation about how do we have a contract that actually better supports our students, not just supports the needs of the contractor, because I feel like right now the contract is geared towards what's beneficial for them, and we need something that's going to be really beneficial for us. And I don't want to leave money on the table in the future, specifically for school buses, and then have school buses fall apart for our communities when we could have had extra money that could have supported our students. I'm referring to the $8 million from the electrification that ground transport. I'm not sure if it was ground transport, but
It was.
so ground transport decided that they didn't want to participate on Hawaii Island. So, and then Hawaii Island had no school buses the next year. So I don't know if you can speak to that, or if that's something that you can take into consideration as you kind of revisit these conversations on the contract themselves, considering that they did break the contract. I think that we need to craft contracts that are much more beneficial towards our students.
Electric bus, I'm not familiar with ground transport saying they didn't want $8 million of the buses. My understanding of that federal program is that it's a reimbursement. You have to turn in a current bus. When this first came up, to get the money for an electric bus, you had to drill a hole through your engine and take a picture of it and show it to the DOT, federal DOT, to show that, yeah, this old nasty diesel bus was really out of commission. You weren't just parking it and then selling it to somebody else to run. But it's a reimbursement proposition, and that it's not a dollar-for-dollar reimbursement. So I know only enough to be dangerous, so I'm not going to answer that with any definitive statement. But as far as turn down the electric bus, and now we're short of buses, we're short of drivers, we're not short of buses. And if the bus is electric or diesel or whatever, if there's not a driver, that's our problem.
Yeah, but I think the conversation, this is kind of going back to this larger conversation about this we've privatized our bus system for our public education schools, and now our students can't get to school.
Yes.
I think this is like one portion of that much larger conversation that I think needs to be had, considering we're having a conversation about making sure that students go to school.
Yes.
So I hope that in the future we can think about that.
I think when I said we'll do this after action, and what do we do in the future is not just about what happened here, but looking at this long-term trend. What do we do about it? And the answers will go beyond just solving the current problem.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So to kind of follow up on that, and you are looking at next steps in really not just solving this immediate problem, but thinking about transformation of a system that's not serving our students. I'm wondering if you have already reached out to principals, because I know that over the past couple years when I was working on electrification of school buses, I spoke with many principals across the state, and many principals sought to regain control of the school buses. And they lamented the loss of that control and the ability it gave them to serve their students, to go on field trips, to vary their schedules. And I'm wondering if you folks are engaged in that conversation with principals.
Let me see if part of your question relates to the ability to have buses during the school day for field trips.
My question is really about the extent to which the principals are being, and the CASs are being brought into this conversation, and if any of them have expressed the sentiments that they expressed to me, which is that desire to have more control. And not all principals did, but many did. So, and it's pretty geographically specific, so.
I don't know, I don't think the department, I don't know, long ago might have been, but the school bus system used to be run by the Department of Accounting and General Services, DAGS. And it came over to DOE by statute around 2000, maybe 1998. So before that, it was even further removed from the principals. I don't think that the principals have ever had direct responsibility for the buses.
No, not
Thank you
direct
for
control, but like within the complex area.
I think
Yeah.
I have had some discussion with principals. I think there's a difference between principals wanting the department to run a bus system or principals wanting their complex area or the school to run a bus system. I think I believe that they are the few that I've talked to were looking at the department to do it. I think, though, we still, whether it's the department, we still would run into problems with the number of shortage of drivers.
Oh, right. I'm not
I think-
saying it solves this
yeah,
problem.
I think when it was posed, well, would the school then be willing to do buses? The answer was no. I'm not sure if we are talking about the same principles,
talk
but we
offline.
can talk offline,
Yeah.
definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair.
Thank you again for being here. So I think part of what I'm struggling with, and many of us are, is, this is an issue that didn't happen just this school year. I know this this happened last school year. This has happened the year prior. It's an ongoing crisis. We've had several proposals in the legislature in the past year to address this, whether it was to put into statute governor's emergency proclamation to expand the types of vehicles that could be used, whether it's looking at staggered school times, and all kinds of different like creative scenarios, and calling for the department to really create some type of contingency to prevent this from happening again. And then yet we were all caught off guard 2 days before the school year started to not have been received any type of outreach, any type of planning, any type of consideration for communities that hundreds of families like that were severe experienced severe disruptions. And so we knew that a new contract was coming, and you mentioned earlier that part of, for example, the contractual obligation is for you to receive a bus driver roster 45 days before the school year starting. And you also confirmed, from what I heard from you, is that it was not a failure on the contractor side to communicate this to the department, that it may seem that we have a shortage, which we already knew, and they informed us that it seems that we may not meet it, but we could, right? So what this translates to me is it's a failure on the department side to have acted on this information that you had received weeks prior to the school year starting and really prevent this from happening. Because to have been able to say like, okay, let's wait and see if they can actually meet and come up with the drivers is really, I feel like, unfair to all of us and all the communities that ended up just, experiencing and continue to experience this struggle. I know that the factors that you mentioned in restoring some of the routes, and I'm very grateful that there were a couple routes restored in Mililani, where we have about 500, 600 kids without transportation. But you mentioned in response to Rep. Martinez's question that you consider, of course, special ed, availability of public transport, as well as population demographics. But there's other things I didn't hear, like safe routes to school, safety. Just last week we had, that incident in Kalihi when a student was, shot in like the school bus. I feel like there's multiple variables, but what is the department, in knowing what you know now, you mentioned if you're an emperor, you would design this differently. So in knowing what you know now, from within the last year of this ongoing crisis, why did we not have a contingency plan? Why didn't we not have preventive measures so that we could enforce the contract that was in the contract that, the new contract that was going to come, so that to ensure that we have as minimal disruption, minimal cancellations as possible?
Well, I think earlier I agree that we could have and should have, with hindsight, done it differently. The shooting on the bus, I thought that was a city bus.
It is, yes, it is.
not
But
a
it's one
school
of the
bus.
factors that are contributing to families, not wanting to ride, for the fear of safety of their kids. But my question related to that is, in addition to all these factors and studying, is there a bigger plan? Because to me, it just feels like transportation is just treated like separately, and it's a huge impact on our students' ability to learn, our students' ability to get to school safely and on time. But if we're really designing an equitable transportation system, that really prioritizes the student, it's looking beyond what the public infrastructure looks like. It's looking beyond the demographics, It's looking at, safety, reliability, communication to families, and understanding, there are certain families and certain populations that do not even have a personal vehicle, do not even have access to a county bus. And so these are things that we were hoping could have been part of the planning. But so I'm asking you is, beyond relying fully on what the contractor said that they will do, what controls are there that you're starting to look at so that should this happen again, the department can enforce and the department can take action.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's what the after-action report will develop.
So we,
So you're saying,
we're
what do we-
reacting. We didn't. Sorry, are you confirming that no plan had since been started? We're only starting the plan now.
No, we're not even starting to plan now. We will start to plan when this is resolved because we don't want to take our eye off the ball of let's get the students to school now. Once that happens, then we can say, okay, so what do we do wrong? What do we do so that we don't do it again? And more important, I think, is what do we do so that that demographic decline in the availability of bus drivers doesn't affect us? That's the real.
Okay, in our request, as this part of this planning and after action report, please include the school leadership, stakeholders within the community, because you need to hear directly from from the various families, not just in like underserved areas, but really folks who, want to be able to help the department achieve a more resilient transportation system. The second question that I have, do you currently have a performance management program in place with the contractor?
Yes.
What data is being collected and how often do they report to you? How often is this report being evaluated?
It's a quarterly report, the details of which I'm personally not familiar with, but happy to give them to you.
So there's an existing measure to look at how a contractor is experiencing ongoing issues when it comes to like reliability, driver shortage.
Yeah, I don't know the details, but I can get them for you.
My last question is, will the department be planning to assess the negative impact on these cancellations on the students, I guess their access to education, and particularly in like rural and other underserved areas where routes have not been restored since the past, not just this year, but the past year?
When you say like
any negative impact on their academics. So, basically we told our students, okay, no more. And my understanding is we maintained status quo. So none of our high school routes were restored, at least for my district last year. But since then, has there been any negative impact on our, students' ability to, learn? And is this something that's going to be part of what you're going to assess?
Short answer is I don't know. There's such a lot of noise, meaning external influences on student achievement data. We took a short look at. So how does school attendance correlate with riding the bus? The folks who have to pay for the bus have better attendance than the ones who get it for free, which is, on the one hand, counterintuitive. On the other, you say, well, maybe the students who get it free for a reason, and it may be those reasons that affect their attendance and not the bus. That's what I mean by noise.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. But you know that if a student is not able to attend school, that has an impact.
Absolutely.
So do you have that information if there's any families that are not able to get to school because they don't have transportation to and from school?
If there is, I don't know. You mean measuring? What would we measure?
Do you have information on if any families have reached out to the department saying that they cannot get their kids to school?
I'm not aware of any. Anecdotally, yes, but whether there's anything larger that you could say is reliable data, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you. And so I know that STS is working on reconfiguring some of the routes and leveraging the emergency proclamation and small school buses to do so. Do you have an idea as to how many routes using that strategy was able to be absorbed that are not currently being served?
The short answer is no. The little school bus only takes 14 kids, where the big one takes 56 high school or 72 elementary. So a little school bus cannot serve a route. And the schools typically only have one. So it's kind of a pick and choose. Where do we get the biggest bang for our buck? And that's really a school level decision.
Okay, and so earlier you indicated that you're not familiar with the particulars of the contract. You also said in your presentation that one of the other providers is servicing some of the routes that GTI was unable to do. Does the department have an idea as to the totality of the service providers if together you were to incorporate a clause in the contract that says if you are not able to perform this segment of your contract, it is therefore forfeit, and have those remaining service providers pick up that slack? Do we have enough capacity within the private sector in the system to, if we make that adjustment in our paperwork, it'll fulfill the remaining routes?
No, the overall problem is the shortage of drivers. Doesn't really matter who the contractor is. Just as a for instance, we haven't talked about Kauai because a problem hasn't surfaced, but the contractor there is flying drivers from Oahu every week to do that. And if those drivers weren't being flown to Kauai, they would be available on Oahu. It's just a statewide shortage that, as I say, is a bigger picture than we don't have a bus today.
So what is the process for, we run into the situation to where a provider cannot fully or partially comply with the terms of the contract? What is the process in place right now to remove that provider from the contract? And does the emergency proclamation streamline that process? And do we need to put into statute some language to streamline that process if a provider is not performing or is in non-compliance of the constructs of the contract?
You could do it. Again, it doesn't really solve the problem of not enough drivers in the state. Another issue is that there are only 3 large contractors left out of many more long ago, not counting the 3 on Molokai. So it's kind of interesting that here's Molokai with 3 moms and pops still left. And then the whole rest of the state only has 3. Roberts, Ground Transport, and Akita on Kauai. It's not, I don't think, in the departments or the taxpayers or the students or anybody's interest where we get to the point where there's only 1 left. So I think it's in everybody's interest to keep as much competition as we can. And hammering one of the contractors sounds good, but in the long run, we need to sit down and say, how do we collectively solve the problem?
So if that's not a potential option, and we know that we lack capacity overall within the private sector or public sector, we're looking at some of these alternative solutions. You mentioned staggered start times. If in fact we know that's successful, what are some of the barriers as to why that has not been more seriously considered by the department?
Because when we've run it up the flagpole, the schools have...
What does that mean when you say that? You
Well,
said
we
it a
say,
couple times.
anybody interested in looking at this? And nobody says me. That's running it up the flagpole.
But I think Superintendent said earlier that some of the principals were interested in looking at that solution.
As of yesterday, I do, yeah. But it's more than the principals. Well, what about the parents? Parents have got a routine of, my kid goes to school at 8 and school's POW at 2:30, and now you want him to go to bed go to school at 9. What kind of mischief is he going to get into after I've gone to work, and he or she doesn't have to go to school? So I think it's a community issue rather than a school decision or a department decision.
Superintendent, you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. I want to piggyback on what Deputy Moore shared. Staggering the school schedule also provides some downstream consequences and challenges for families. For example, if you're starting elementary school at 8 o'clock, intermediate middle school at 8:30, and the high school at 9. We want to start with the elementary schools because when on the back end, when school ends, we would want to be sure that we're releasing the elementary school students first, then the middle, then the high, because we don't want high school students or middle school students being released before the younger kids. Because then what happens sometimes is they go down to the school, and then you have issues related to bullying and such. The other thing to think about is that if high school starts later, that means they end later. Then we also need to think about the extracurricular activities that happen at high schools. For example, athletics, band, many of the different programs that are happening at the high schools also get pushed back by an hour. And then we may have situations where high school students, when they're needing to get home after their extracurricular, they also run into problems because it's actually an hour later than they normally would leave for home. The other thing that Deputy Moore shared was about parents and parent drop-off. There have been instances, as we explored this, that parents also rely sometimes on older kids to take care of the younger students when they're at home. And if younger students are getting there first, and then older students an hour later, that also poses challenges for families. So while staggering times may address the issue related to, some of the issues related to transportation, there are other factors I think that we need to consider in addressing this.
So then you said also in your presentation that some jurisdictions on the continent do utilize the staggered school start times. How do they address some of those challenges that you just mentioned?
Well, I think one approach would be to say, let's get a relatively small group of parents, teachers, school administrators, say, go off and take a look at 2 or 3 school districts on the mainland that do this, come back and tell us, how does it work? How do they address exactly those problems? I think it's very hard for us who have never experienced a staggered school schedule we can think of all the problems, but somebody has made it work, but we can't think of how. I can't think of how.
Some of the schools right now are not maybe now, but they used to be staggered in start times. So we have some experience and some institutional knowledge as to how to do that.
Where were those?
You don't know?
No.
Okay, it's okay. Members, any other questions?
Quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
So just actually following up on that. So first of all, it's my understanding that all of the changes that you're contemplating are actionable by the board. Is that correct? None of the changes that you shared on the slideshow or in the follow-up, you talked about a couple other different immediate remedies. None of those require legislative action, correct?
Correct.
And some of them might require board action. You might have to come back to the legislature for additional resources.
Or collective bargaining.
Or collective bargaining.
Collective bargaining,
That would
sure.
be a big one for the 0.75. Okay, and then my only other comment or request is that when you are discussing staggered start times, if you can please incorporate the research, the educational research that shows that staggered start times, late start times are very beneficial for older students. And the research is pretty clear. So that should be a consideration when you're making these decisions, and I hope it will be.
Madam Chair, we did have a high school that has implemented a later start time for students, and they were going off of the premise that if older students get up later, they'll be more alert when they come to school an hour later, because of the attendance chronic absenteeism at that time for that school. So the school implemented, I believe it's a 9 o'clock start time.
Which school is this?
It's Kaimuki High School started that.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. What we found though is that, and I need to double check because has been, I think, a year or two since I've talked to the principal, that we're not sure, we haven't seen an increase in a decrease in chronic absenteeism. It starts an hour later, but those students still come late, whatever time, if they're coming a half an hour late, where school starts at 8, they come at 8:30.
Well, that's a separate
Yeah.
problem, but.
So there are other
right.
issues related to
Yeah, I'm
that.
separate but related, but I'm really talking about the brain research that shows that it's much more effective if older students can start later. So please consider that.
Thank you.
Rep. Garcia.
So the governor issued his proclamation, which gave leeway for interim solutions. You mentioned the National Guard. How did that conversation go? And is there any?
Actually, we just submitted it yesterday. There's been discussions, but the formal request went yesterday.
And that would be for them to fill routes, for them to drive buses, for them to.
It was open-ended because they weren't sure how they would respond. So it was not, we want your buses and your drivers, or we
Okay.
want your drivers in whose buses. It's,
It is being looked at, though, as a potential solution.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair, you have a question?
Yes.
Okay, Vice Chair.
For the problem that we're trying to solve, and I think the purpose of today's hearing is really addressing, right, the lapses in the existing with the existing services. We already all know that the root cause is, right, the shortage of drivers. But who if it's not the department's responsibility to make right, like who then does this fall under? Because in order to get and to really address the problem that we're trying to solve, it does require, robust like stakeholder input of like all the different, I guess, piecemeal and anecdotal and all the different like experiences. I feel like, are we really utilizing to the best of our ability, all the expertise, everybody that's really, as you mentioned, we need more collaboration to really like problem solve and address this issue. But what is the department going to do in terms of, and what role do you feel you play in addressing the root cause of the workforce shortage issue? What do you feel our role should be, knowing what we know, that it's not necessarily just increasing the starting pay to, I don't know, $32 an hour, that there's so many complexities involved in just recruitment and retention. Certainly, it's not our role to control the market, right? But what do you feel the department's role is, and what do you feel like our role should be, knowing that this is the root cause of the issue? And how will you consider all, other factors such as staggered, other potential basically policy solutions that you mentioned may not currently be in your area of expertise, but certainly others have had success and have had experienced success to be creative and be innovative in being able to basically guarantee what we planned for, which was ensuring that kids can get to school, right?
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
our responsibility is to solve that problem. In short, that's our responsibility.
Superintendent, any input on the current planning?
Pretty more share the after action report will shed light into steps that we need to take in moving forward. So we definitely will be seriously taking a look at that and working together with our stakeholders, with the bus contractors, and see what we can do to.
Is this
improve.
is this the plan, what will go into the action, after action report? Is this something you can share with the committee for us to provide some feedback on? What would be the purpose and the goals and the timeline for getting
We
something
can
out
get
to
that
us
to you.
by?
We can get that to you.
It's really a what happened, why, what do we do so it doesn't happen again? It's conceptually quite straightforward. It's not necessarily easy to put together overnight. You need to, as Superintendent said, pull all stakeholders together because they have the information as to what happened. They have the information collectively, we can figure out the why, and then again, collectively, so how do we fix it?
Okay, members, any other questions? I have a couple other questions. And so per your proposed solution regarding the augmentation of the CDLs, also taking on roles at the school campuses, do you have a cost estimate as to what that would be if it's approved by the necessary unions, of course?
I'm sorry, the cost to do what?
Do you have a cost estimate on how much additional appropriation you folks would need to implement that strategy? Or are you just expecting the schools to take that cost out of their weighted student formulas?
Which particular strategy would?
0.75.
No, this would not be necessarily adding any more employee time at the school. It would be saying, and again, I'm just making it up, if you have 4 custodians or 3 custodians, you could have 4 each working 3/4 time. You haven't done a thing to the school payroll, but you've freed up somebody to drive the bus. It's that kind of a thing. I don't see it as a cost. I see it as a reallocation of the work.
I see. Yeah, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here because the time is getting late.
Yeah, I need to run soon.
Per the current evaluation process, I know it's an oversimplification, but I was told that approximately 70% of the scoring regarding those potential contracts is for operational capacity, defined as you're looking at the providers to see who has the best capacity to actually carry out the terms of the contract. And then the remaining 30% is regarding pricing or proposed costs for the service. Is that accurate?
The 30% is accurate. The other 70 is spread across a whole lot of things. What's your safety plan? What's your plan for hiring drivers? What's your plan for maintenance? What's your plan for fleet turnover so we don't have all old buses at the end? There are probably a dozen different things that go into that other 70%.
Okay. I define that broadly as operational. And
Yes,
so
operational.
I also heard that GTI received a 100% score on that operational component, that 70%. Is that accurate?
I'm not privy to the scores.
Does anyone know?
I'm sure somebody knows because they made the decision, but yes, somebody clearly knows, but I don't know who it is. I mean,
Is anyone
I don't know it myself.
Is anyone here that knows?
I don't know. Yeah.
If in fact that is true, I'm curious as to how they received that score because clearly they were not able to fulfill the terms of the contract. Then as a follow-up per that question, you said that you touched base with the providers on a regular basis to determine whether or not they're going to be ready for the start of school. And that in particular, GTI said that they don't have the capacity now, defined as they don't have the drivers now, but they think that they're going to be able to get there. Clearly, they fell grossly short.
Yep.
And so what assurances did GTI give you that made the DOE think that they were going to be able to cover those routes?
I didn't hear them, but I believe they were oral.
What does that mean?
They said it would happen. Do you mean something in writing or?
So they told you that they're going to be able to cover those routes, and that was enough for you folks to not give our community members warning that there might be an issue.
Well, as I said, had we to do it over again, we would have done it differently.
Okay. When did the department decide that 3 days' notice was sufficient to let families know that their routes was not going to be covered?
We didn't decide that 3 days' notice was sufficient. We decided with only 3 days left that it wasn't going to happen. Given where we were, better to do it with 3 days than with no days. That was the.
Members, do you have any other questions?
I have a question just on the timing, because in the current contract, I have the current contract here in front of me, at least for my complex area for ground transportation. It does say in here that the bus driver roster information is provided 45 days prior to the school year. Can you confirm that you did collect this information 45 days prior to the school year?
And more recently than that. It was not just a 45 days and then we'll wait. It was,
So at 45 days prior to the school year, it was possible that the department was already aware that we didn't have the full roster and enough drivers to meet the planned routes.
yes, but that in and of itself is not terribly surprising because of the turnover, the expectation on the part of the contractor that the former contractor's employees some of them would come over.
And yet still between the 45 days leading up to the 3 days prior to the school year started, the department was hoping and relying that the contractor will meet its obligation in the hopes that they would be able to find all the drivers necessary to meet the routes.
Yeah, it was an expectation, not a hope. And again, as I said, if we did it again, we would do it differently.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
And excuse me, I have another forum I'm supposed to be presenting at. I'm supposed to leave at 4:30. So.
Okay, well, if you have to go, we're going to continue because we have some more questions.
Yeah.
If someone else can assume the role.
Superintendent.
Can't just in the
That's
information
good.
briefing because you
Thank
have to go.
Thank you, Deputy. I will do the best I can to answer any
Rep.
questions.
Capella.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just a question to follow up on that topic in particular. Who is the person that has the most communication with the contractor? Because there's a lot of bureaucracy within the Department of Education, and I really am concerned with. There had to have been a person that saw this and then thought, okay, well, school starts tomorrow. It's not like it's a secret of when school starts. So a decision was made at a certain point to tell all of us. Who made that decision? Walk us through, I think, that portion of it.
To the best of my understanding, the student transportation section works with the contract provider and works with the assistant superintendent for the area and myself. So if there is anyone that would accept responsibility for what happened, that you can put that on me.
So when did they tell you? Was it the 45 days prior that, and then from the 45 days, if that's obviously wasn't going to happen because it was communicated that it wasn't looking positive, there had to have been 25 days, 15 days. There's a lot of time in between then and 3 days before school starts. When did you know?
I believe it was, let's see, it was well, it was right the week before, or right before we made the announcement to the decision to suspend routes.
So you knew 5 days prior.
I'm not sure on the exact number of days, but whatever I believe it was the Tuesday or Wednesday prior.
I think that's an internal thing because I think this also speaks to the issue from last year. Last year, it's similar to Representative LaChica. I had a school bus route that had been completely cut off, and I had tried to have a conversation with transportation, and they weren't even aware that the route was no longer in service.
We did
There's
have
a lot of miscommunication.
we did have just to share that we did have a changeover in personnel within our transportation section, and as Deputy Moore shared, moving forward, if we have to do it again, and we will be sure that we're addressing the lessons learned from this year, so that and work together with the legislature, so that we can do our best and working together with our contractors, so that we can minimize any kind of disruption to students and their families.
Okay, because it seems like it's partially the contract, which is absolutely a problem, but I think it's also it's a staffing issue within the DOE as well that seems to have led to this. So I hope that there's better communication in that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Capella, just to follow up, when you had shared that it's a staffing issue, we do have one person that is responsible for in working together with the contractors for all of the routes. So that is definitely something we can bring to the legislature and have further discussion on.
Yeah, I think one person for the entire state is
hard.
not enough.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Any other questions? Okay, seeing no other questions. We appreciate that the department took the time to come out. Obviously, to me, this briefing was mild because I could assure you the information that we received from our communities was not mild in any capacity. And so I hope that the department is going to work on solutions so that we do not have a repeat of this situation next year. So either we implement staggered start times, or we look at the solution that you propose, a combination of some other solutions, but we need the board, the department, and other stakeholders to work together to address this issue so we don't have a repeat of it next year. Hawaii has a lot of capacity, and I want us to be one of the states that figures out how to address this issue so that other states can look at what we're doing here. Because I know you, I know your team, you have the capacity to figure it out, and I want it to be figured out, please. And this committee may have a follow-up informational briefing to see what the progress is in the near future, but it's going to come up again.
Yes, I understand. Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to share, and to the committee members. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Vice Chair.
Okay, adjourned.
Thank you.